Would you sign your name to love, knowing death was waiting at the church doors? The church bell struck 7 times across Millfield's dusty main thoroughfare, each bronze note hanging in the October air like a question waiting for answer. Marshal Thomas Kane adjusted the folded marriage paper in his vest pocket, creased from handling, warm from his chest, and watched the morning train exhale its last breath of steam. 47 miles east to Denver, the conductor had announced. 47 miles to anywhere but here. Sarah Whitmore sat on the depot bench beside her leather hat box, brass corners glinting in the early sunday. Her fingers traced the worn handle. Thomas!
In the beginning
You're
was the
fidgeting
Word,
again.
and the
Train's
Word
late.
was with
He
God,
checked his pocket
and the
watch.
Word was
7,
God.
12. 3 minutes behind the Colorado and Southern schedule. In 3 hours, they'd be married. In 4, they'd board the eastbound to start fresh in a city where his name meant nothing more than ink on a hotel register. Mrs. Patterson says October weddings bring the longest happiness. Sarah opened the hat box and lifted out her wedding dress, white silk that caught the light like water. She should know married 43 years this December. Kane's hand found the marriage paper again. Yesterday, Judge Morrison had signed it in advance. Unusual, but legal. Just needs the preacher's blessing and your signature, Morrison had said. Though I wonder why the hurry to leave town, Marshal. The telegraph office door opened with a brass bell's chime. Doc Henley emerged, his medical bag in one hand, a folded postcard in the other. His face carried the grey pallor Kane had seen too often, the look of a man delivering news that would change everything. Marshal. Doc's voice was steady, but his fingers trembled against the postcard. This came on the early wire. Postmarked yesterday from Pueblo, Kane took the card. A photograph of the Arkansas River, peaceful and broad, but through the center, a neat hole punched by a .45 caliber bullet. On the back, in careful script, Thomas Kane, Millfield, Colorado, the 15th of October, 1889. You killed my brother. I'm coming to collect. Sarah leaned closer, her wedding dress rustling in her lap. What is it? Nothing. Kane folded the postcard, slipped it beside the marriage paper. Doc, who delivered this? Telegraph boy. Said the sender paid extra for morning delivery. Doc Henley's eyes flicked toward Main Street, where early shoppers moved between the mercantile and the blacksmith. Thomas, there's something else. Jake Morrison, the judge's nephew he rode in about an hour ago, says he saw 3 riders camped at Devil's Creek. Good horses, well armed. The church bell chimed the quarter hour. 7:15. Kane stood, his hand instinctively checking his Colt. Sarah, maybe we should wait. Catch the afternoon train instead. Wait? She folded the wedding dress carefully, placed it back in the hat box. Thomas Kane. I've been waiting 2 years for you to stop running from whatever's chasing you. I won't wait another day. A horse whinnied from the direction of Main Street. Kane turned to look, and through the morning haze, he saw them 3 men on horseback, riding slowly down the center of the street like a funeral procession. The lead rider wore a black hat and a silver star, not a lawman's badge, but something else. Something older. Don't look back, Kane murmured, remembering his father's words from 20 years ago. When you're walking away from trouble, don't look back. It gives fear a place to grow. But fear had found him anyway. It wore his face in the mirror each morning, spoke his name in the wind, and now it rode down Main Street with a bullet punched through a postcard and a debt 3 years overdue. Sarah stood, took his arm. The preacher's waiting, Thomas. And I'm not leaving this bench without a ring on my finger and your name next to mine on that paper. The riders had stopped in front of the saloon. Kane could see the lead man's face, now lean, weathered, with eyes the color of winter sky. Clayton Murdoch. The brother he'd killed had been a bank robber named Frank. The law said Kane was right. His conscience wasn't so sure. 10 minutes, Kane said. Give me 10 minutes to handle this. Number. Sarah's grip tightened on his arm. We walk to that church together, Thomas Kane. Whatever's behind us stays behind us. The church bell tolled the half hour. 7:30. Kane looked at his bride-to-be, her brown eyes steady as bedrock, then at the 3 men dismounting across the street. His hand found the marriage paper one more time, felt its sharp creases against his palm. Time to choose between the past that haunted him and the future that waited. Inside the First Baptist Church, Reverend Mills adjusted his spectacles and opened the worn Bible to the marriage ceremony. Sunlight streamed through the single stained glass window, a dove with outstretched wings, donated by the Whitmore family when they'd first settled Millfield. Sarah's father had carved the altar from Colorado pine. Her mother's quilt covered the front pew. Dearly beloved, Reverend Mills began, but Kane's attention drifted to the church doors. Through the gap beneath, he could see the shadow of boots on the front steps. Sarah squeezed his hand. Thomas! We gather today to witness the union of Thomas Kane and Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore. The Reverend's voice echoed in the empty church. They'd chosen a private ceremony, just the two of them and God's witness. Now Kane wondered if privacy had been wisdom or mistake. The church doors opened with a slow creak. Clayton Murdoch stepped inside, his spurs ringing against the wooden floor. Behind him, two men Kane didn't recognize but whose intentions were clear as gunpowder. They moved to the back pews and sat, hats in their laps, as if they'd come for worship. Continue, Murdoch said quietly. Don't let us interrupt such a blessed occasion. Reverend Mills looked between Kane and the visitors. Perhaps we should continue, Kane said. His hand moved closer to his gun belt, then stopped. Not in church, not in front of Sarah. Not today. Do you, Thomas Kane, take Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. The words came out steady, but Kane felt sweat between his shoulder blades. From the corner of his eye, he watched Murdoch's hands resting on his knees, but ready to move. Do you, Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore, take Thomas Kane to be your lawfully wedded husband? Sarah turned to face him fully, her back to the men in the rear pews. I do. Now. And always. Then, by the power vested in me, by the territory of Colorado and Almighty God, I pronounce you husband and wife. Reverend Mills closed the Bible. You may kiss your bride. Kane leaned forward, kissed Sarah gently. Her lips were warm, and for a moment the weight of the past lifted from his shoulders. When they broke apart, she smiled and whispered, See? The world didn't end. Not yet, Kane murmured. They turned to walk down the aisle. Murdoch and his men stood, a gesture that might have been politeness in other circumstances. Now it felt like a challenge. Congratulations, Marshal Kane. Murdoch's voice carried the same tone he might use ordering coffee. Fine ceremony. Your bride's quite lovely. Much obliged. Kane kept walking. Sarah's arm linked through his. 10 steps to the door. 9. 8. Shame about your brother-in-law. Kane stopped. What? Frank Murdoch. My brother. You killed him 3 years ago in that bank robbery down in Trinidad. Shot him in the back while he was running away. He was armed. He'd just robbed the First National and shot a teller. That teller lived. Frank died. Murdoch stepped into the aisle. I've come to balance the books. Sarah's grip tightened on Kane's arm. Thomas, let's go. Good advice from your new bride. Murdoch smiled, but his eyes remained winter cold. Walk away, Marshal. Just like you did that day in Trinidad. Just like you've been doing ever since. The church bell chimed 8 o'clock. Outside, Kane could hear the normal sounds of mourning horses clopping past, the blacksmith's hammer. Children playing, life continuing, while death waited in the house of God. This isn't finished, Kane said. No, Murdoch agreed. It isn't. Kane and Sarah walked to the doors. As they stepped outside, Sarah pulled the marriage paper from Kane's vest pocket and signed her name with a pencil from her reticule. There, she said. Now it's legal. She folded the paper and placed it in her hat box beside her wedding dress. Where to now, husband? Kane looked down Main Street toward the depot, then back at the church where 3 men waited like a storm that hadn't yet decided to break. The hotel. We'll get our things and catch the noon train. But as they walked toward the Millfield Hotel, Kane saw more riders entering town. Word traveled fast in small places. By sunset, every man who'd ever held a grudge would know Clayton Murdoch had come calling. The hat box swung gently at Sarah's side, brass corners catching the October Sunday inside. Her wedding dress lay folded next to their signed marriage certificate, two symbols of the future they were trying to claim. Behind them, the church doors remained open, waiting. In room 12 of the Millfield Hotel, Sarah packed their belongings, while Kane watched the street from the window. The morning light had shifted, casting longer shadows between the buildings. Across the way, three men sat on the Mercantile's porch, playing cards. Not Murdoch's men, but locals who'd heard the news and decided to stay close for the show. Thomas. Sarah folded her traveling dress into the carpet bag. Tell me about Frank Murdoch. Kane turned from the window. His wife sat on the bed's edge, hands still, waiting for truth. Bank robbery in Trinidad. May of 1886. I was deputy then, working with Sheriff Martinez. Frank Murdoch and two others hit the First National just after opening. Shot a teller named William Cooper in the shoulder, took $800, and you killed him. Shot him as he ran. He was armed, dangerous. The law said I was right. Kane sat beside her on the bed. But he was running away, Sarah. Had his back to me when I pulled the trigger. She took his hand. Were you afraid? Terrified. 24 years old, first time I'd drawn my gun on a man. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly missed. Kane looked at their joined fingers. But I didn't miss. Put a bullet right between his shoulder blades, and you've been running from that moment ever since, wouldn't you? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the hotel's lobby clock chimed the half hour. 8:30. The noon train was 3.5 hours away. My father killed a man once, she said finally. Before we came to Colorado, a claim jumper in California who tried to take our mine at gunpoint. Papa shot him fair, but he still couldn't sleep for 2 years afterward. Mama said guilt and fear were like weeds. The more you tend them, the deeper they grow. Kane squeezed her hand. What did your father do? Stopped running, planted roots, built something good where the bad thing happened. She smiled. Built a life that mattered more than the mistake. Through the window, Kane saw Clayton Murdoch emerge from the church, his two men flanking him. They walked slowly down Main Street, spurs ringing on the wooden sidewalks. Murdoch stopped at the hotel's front steps, looked up toward the second-floor windows, then tipped his hat. He knows we're here, Kane said. Let him know. Sarah stood, walked to the window. She pushed it open and called down. Mr. Murdoch, if you're looking for my husband, he'll be on the front porch in 5 minutes. Bring your grievance into the daylight where decent folks can witness it. Murdoch looked up at her, surprised. Ma'am, this is between your husband and me. Nothing about Thomas Kane is just between him and anybody anymore. I'm his wife now, which makes his debts mine too. Sarah's voice carried clear and strong down to the street. 5 minutes. Mr. Murdoch. Front porche. She closed the window, turned to Kane. There, no more running. Kane stared at her. In the space of 10 minutes, she'd transformed from frightened bride to fierce partner. Sarah, number. She picked up the hat box, held it against her chest. We're not getting on that train, Thomas. We're staying in Millfield. We're going to face whatever needs facing, and then we're going to build something good here. He'll kill me, maybe. But if you keep running, you'll kill yourself piece by piece anyway. She opened the hat box, pulled out the folded marriage certificate. This paper says we're bound together, for better or worse. Well, this is the worse. Let's see how strong the binding holds. The hotel clock chimed 8:45. 15 minutes until 9, when the morning stage would arrive from Denver, bringing more witnesses to whatever was about to happen. Kane stood, checked his Colt one more time, then offered Sarah his arm. Ready, Mrs. Kane? Ready, Marshal Kane. They walked downstairs together, through the hotel lobby where other guests had gathered at the windows, and out onto the front porch where Clayton Murdoch waited in the street. The morning sun had climbed higher, burning away the last of the shadows. Time for truth, whatever the cost. Clayton Murdoch stood in the center of Main Street, his boots planted wide, hands loose at his sides. The street had filled with spectators, shopkeepers in doorways, women peering from second-story windows, Children clustered behind the water trough. Word had spread through Millfield like wildfire. The marshal was finally making a stand. Kane descended the hotel steps, Sarah beside him. She carried the hat box in her left hand, her right arm linked through his. "This isn't your fight, ma'am," Murdoch called. "Step aside and let men handle men's business. Everything about my husband is my business now." Sarah's voice carried clearly across the street, including his past mistakes and whatever payment you think they require. Doc Henley emerged from his office carrying his medical bag. He set it on the mercantile steps and took a seat beside it, ready for whatever was coming. At the far end of the street, the blacksmith had stopped his hammering. The whole town held its breath. "Frank Murdoch was my younger brother," Clayton said, addressing Sarah as much as Kane. "Good with horses, gentle with children. Made bad choices, yes, but he was trying to change. Had a sweetheart in Pueblo, talked about settling down. He robbed a bank," Kane said. "Shot an innocent man. William Cooper lived. Frank didn't." Murdoch's hand moved closer to his gun. "You shot him in the back while he was running away. The law. The law." Murdoch spat in the dust. "The law says a lot of things. Doesn't make them right." The church bell chimed 9 o'clock. As if summoned by the sound, the Denver stage rounded the corner onto Main Street, its 4 horses blowing hard from the mountain climb. The driver saw the crowd and slowed, finally stopping near the depot. Passengers pressed their faces to the windows, sensing drama. Among them, Kane recognized a familiar face. Judge Morrison, returning from circuit court in Colorado Springs. "Thomas!" The judge climbed down from the stage, his black coat dusty from travel. "What's this about?" "Family business, Your Honor," Murdoch said, not taking his eyes off Kane. "The marshal killed my brother 3 years ago. I've come to balance the accounts." Judge Morrison walked slowly into the street, placing himself between the two men. "Clayton Murdoch, isn't it? I remember your brother's case. Deputy Kane, Marshal Kane, now acted within the law. Frank was armed and dangerous. Frank was running away. After committing armed robbery and attempting murder, the judge's voice carried the authority of 20 years on the bench. The shooting was justified, maybe by law, not by justice." Sarah stepped forward, still carrying the hat box. "Mr. Murdoch, what would satisfy your sense of justice? My husband's death? Would that bring your brother back?" Murdoch hesitated. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his winter blue eyes. "It would balance the books." "No," said a new voice. "It wouldn't." Everyone turned. An elderly woman walked slowly down the church steps, Mrs. William Cooper, the banker's wife. Her husband's arm hung useless at his side, a permanent reminder of Frank Murdoch's bullet. "I was there that day in Trinidad," she said, her voice clear despite her 70 years. "Saw your brother shoot my William for no reason, except William was doing his job. Saw him run with our neighbor's money in his hands." She stopped beside Judge Morrison. "Marshal Kane saved lives that day. Maybe mine. Maybe others." "One life for another," Murdoch said, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. "No," Mrs. Cooper said gently. "One choice for another. Your brother chose to rob and shoot. Marshal Kane chose to stop him. The rest is just consequence." The hotel clock chimed the quarter hour. 9:15. Kane felt the weight of the moment, the entire town watching, waiting for his decision. He could draw, probably win. Murdoch had hesitated too long already. Or he could walk away, leave Millfield forever, carry the burden to his grave. Instead, he did something unexpected. He unbuckled his gun belt, handed it to Sarah. "Mr. Murdoch," Kane said, stepping into the street. "You want to balance the books? Then let's talk about Frank's debts, too." Kane reached into his vest pocket, pulled out the folded marriage certificate and the bullet-holed postcard. He handed both to Judge Morrison. Frank Murdoch robbed $800 from the First National Bank of Trinidad on May 15th, 1886. Interest at 5% annually would make that debt $1,200 today. Kane looked directly at Murdoch. "I killed your brother, yes. But your brother stole from innocent people and nearly killed a man. Both debts need paying." He pulled out his wallet. counted out bills. $1,200, my savings, and Sarah's wedding money. Mrs. Cooper, this belongs to your husband's bank. The old woman stared at the money. Marshall, this isn't necessary. Yes, it Island Kane handed her the bills. Frank's debt, paid in full with interest. He turned back to Murdoch. Now we're even. Your brother's victims are made whole. My conscience is clear. The only question remaining is what you choose to do with your grief. Murdoch stared at him, then at the money in Mrs. Cooper's hands, then at Sarah standing on the hotel porch holding Kane's gun belt and her hat box. The church bell chimed the half hour. 9:30. This doesn't bring Frank back, Murdoch said finally. Nothing will, Kane agreed. But maybe it can stop the dying. Murdoch's shoulders sagged slightly. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured bladder. Damn you, Kane. I came here to kill you. I know. I've been waiting for you to try for 3 years. And now? Kane looked at Sarah, at the gathered crowd, at the town he'd tried to leave behind. Now I'm done waiting. Done running. This is where I make my stand. Murdoch nodded slowly, then did something that surprised everyone. He extended his hand. Frank would have liked you paying his debts. He hated owing money. Kane shook it. I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Murdoch. I truly am. So am I, Marshall. So am I. The tension broke like a fever. Conversations resumed, children returned to their games, and the business of living continued. But something fundamental had changed in the space between the hotel porch and the church steps. A debt had been paid, a stand taken, a choice made. Sarah walked into the street, handed Kane his gun belt. Ready to go home, Marshall? Kane buckled the belt around his waist, then took her arm. Where's home? She opened the hat box, pulled out their marriage certificate. The paper was still crisp, still legal, still binding. Wherever we planted. They walked together toward the house they'd rented on Elm Street, a small place with a garden plot and room for children. Behind them, the church bell counted the minutes of their new life. And for the first time in 3 years, Kane didn't look back. The sun climbed toward noon, casting sharp shadows between the buildings of Main Street. Kane and Sarah had reached their rented house, a white cottage with blue shutters and a picket fence that needed mending. Sarah set her hat box on the kitchen table and began unpacking their few belongings while Kane stood at the front window, watching the street. Clayton Murdoch and his men had moved to the saloon, but they hadn't left town. Through the window, Kane could see them at a table near the batwing doors, drinking slowly, talking in low voices, waiting for something. Thomas. Sarah's voice was calm, but when he turned, her face was troubled. There's something else, isn't there? Something you haven't told me. Kane nodded. The 800 francs stole? It wasn't just bank money. Mrs. Patterson had her life savings in that bank money for her son's medical treatment back east. When Frank took it, her boy died. Sarah sank into a kitchen chair. Oh, Thomas. Mrs. Patterson never blamed me for the shooting. But she never forgave Frank Murdoch, either. When she heard Clayton was coming to town, Kane turned back to the window. She sent word to her late husband's brothers in Denver. They should be arriving on the noon train. As if summoned by his words, the train whistle echoed across the valley. Black smoke appeared above the trees to the east, growing larger as the locomotive approached Millfield. How many brothers? 4. All miners, all armed, all carrying 20 years of grief over young Billy Patterson's death. Kane checked his pocket watch. 11:55. Clayton Murdoch came here thinking he had 1 enemy. He's about to discover he has 5. The train pulled into the depot with a screech of brakes and a cloud of steam. Kane could see passengers disembarking, but the distance was too great to make out faces. Within minutes, 4 men in dark coats and broad hats were walking purposefully down Main Street toward the saloon. We have to warn him, Sarah said. Why? He came here to kill me, but you changed his mind. You paid Frank's debt, made peace. Sarah stood, moved to his side at the window. Thomas, if we let him die now, we're no better than he would have been. Kane watched the Patterson brothers approach the saloon. They moved with the deliberate pace of men who'd made up their minds. In 5 minutes, Main Street would run red with blood, Murdoch's blood, his men's blood, Maybe the blood of innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire. Damn, Kane muttered, then kissed Sarah quickly. Stay here. Lock the door. Thomas, lock the door. He ran from the house, down Elm Street toward Main Street. The Patterson brothers had reached the saloon and were spreading out two at the front entrance, one at the side door, one watching the back alley. Professional miners knew how to seal a tunnel. Kane burst through the batwing doors just as the first shots were fired. Clayton Murdoch had seen them coming and overturned his table for cover. His two men crouched beside him, guns drawn. But the Pattersons had the advantage of position and numbers. Bullets splintered the saloon's wooden walls, shattered bottles behind the bar, sent the bartender diving for the floor. "Murdoch!" Kane shouted over the gunfire. "This way!" Murdoch looked at him in disbelief. "Marshal? What?" "Shut up and move!" Kane provided covering fire while Murdoch and his men ran for the rear exit. They burst through the back door into the alley, where the fourth Patterson brother was waiting. Kane shot him in the shoulder before he could fire, sending him spinning into the dust. "My horse is at the livery," Murdoch gasped. "Too far." "This way." Kane led them through a maze of back alleys and side streets, using his knowledge of Millfield to stay ahead of their pursuers. Behind them, the Pattersons regrouped and gave chase, their boots pounding on wooden sidewalks, their voices raised in anger. They reached the depot just as the noon train was preparing to leave. The conductor was checking his watch. The engineer had his hand on the throttle. "Hold that train!" Kane shouted. The conductor recognized him. "Marshal Kane, what's the trouble? Get these men aboard." "Now." Now. Murdoch hesitated at the train car steps. "Marshal, why are you helping me?" "Because my wife was right. If I let you die, I'm no better than the man I was 3 years ago." Murdoch nodded, understanding. He climbed aboard, his men behind him. Through the window, Kane could see them finding seats, their faces pale but grateful. The train whistle blew. Steam hissed. Slowly, the locomotive began to move. The Patterson brothers rounded the corner of the depot building just as the train picked up speed. They raised their guns, but Kane stepped into their line of fire. "It's over," he said. "Like hell it is," snarled the eldest Patterson. "That bastard's brother killed our nephew. Frank Murdoch is 3 years dead." Clayton Murdoch paid his brother's debts and left town. Kane kept his gun holstered, his hands visible but ready. How much more blood will bring Billy back? The Patterson brothers looked at each other, then at the train disappearing around the bend. Their moment was gone. The fire went out of them like water on coals. "This isn't finished, Marshal," the eldest said finally. "Yes, it island." They walked away, their shoulders slumped with defeat. Kane stood on the depot platform, watching the last car vanish into the distance, carrying Clayton Murdoch and 3 years of guilt away from Millfield forever. The church bell chimed noon. Kane smiled, then walked home to his wife. Sarah was waiting on the front porch when Kane returned, the hat box open beside her on the wooden swing. Inside, her wedding dress lay folded next to their marriage certificate, both symbols of the choice they'd made that morning. "Is it over?" she asked. "It's over." Kane sat beside her on the swing, took her hand. The October sun was warm on their faces, and down the street they could see normal life resuming, children playing, horses clopping past, the blacksmith's hammer ringing again. "I gave away our savings," Kane said. "All of it. I know. We'll have to start over. Build everything from nothing." "Good." Sarah leaned against his shoulder. "I prefer building to running." That evening, as shadows lengthened across Millfield's main street, Kane pinned his marshal's badge back on his vest and walked his rounds. At every stop, the mercantile, the livery stable, the church people nodded and smiled. Not because he'd faced down a killer, but because he'd chosen to stay. The folded marriage paper had found its permanent home in Sarah's hatbox, beside the wedding dress she'd wear to their first anniversary celebration. Both had been transformed by the morning's events, no longer symbols of escape, but of commitment, of roots planted deep in Colorado soil. "Don't look back," his father had warned. But sometimes, Kane thought as he completed his evening rounds, the only way forward was to turn around and face what followed you. The bullet had turned. Cowardice had stopped. And in the space between running and standing, a man could find his true measure. The church bell chimed 9 times as Kane headed home to his wife, his town, and the future they would build together, one choice, one day, one stand at a time. If you'd like more stories like this, stay a while. I'll tell the next one tomorrow night.